SuperTalk Mississippi media production.
MidDays with Gerard Gibert is on the air. MidDays with Gerard Gibert is powered by C-Spire. Power your home or business with C-Spire Fiber. To learn more, visit supertalk.fm/C-Spire. C-Spire Fiber powers SuperTalk Mississippi. Get ready to go beyond the headlines and join a meaningful conversation with people from around the state. You're listening to MidDays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk Mississippi.
Everyone, and welcome to MidDays, SuperTalk Mississippi. I'm your host, Gerard Gibert, along with Rhino in the Element Wealth studio, guiding you through the middle of your day with facts, fodder, and fine music. Morning, Rhino.
Howdy.
Man, oh man, we go from the shorts to the blustery cold in a matter of about 24, 48 hours. And up there in the northern part of the United States, a nor'easter is moving through. And that ain't really nice.
I got some friends up that neck of the woods that were sending me pictures of the forecast radar and the historical radar of some storm in like 76 that dumped multiple feet of snow around the Boston area.
Oh, man. So it has evolved into what is known, I never heard of this before, a bomb cyclone.
You've heard bomb cyclone before.
I don't remember. Cyclone, I don't remember hearing bombs.
Oh, yeah. We've had about 4 or 5 of those.
Okay. It has
in recent memory. The Weather Channel went crazy about it.
It has met the meteorological criteria to be deemed a bomb cyclone. That just sounds so ominous. But they're talking snow in New York City in terms of feet, correct, is what I'm hearing up there. So 7,000 flights canceled. My son's scheduled to travel to Virginia today for work, and he was informed this morning that his flight got pushed back, and then it got pushed back to a point where he won't make the connection, and so they pushed it back even further. So he was scheduled to arrive in Virginia about 4 o'clock this afternoon. Now it looks like 11 o'clock tonight. Ah, yes, the joys of air travel, huh? That's where we are. So, what else is going on? The USA wins Olympic hockey gold. How about that? What a thriller that was. You know, of course, for those of us who were old enough, it harkened me back to 1980. Is what it looked like. Now, the United States won the gold in hockey, both in men's and women's hockey. How incredible is that? And perhaps what was most, I felt, rewarding and exciting about this is you had a lot of really patriotic members of the hockey team that spoke up and talked about the victory and how proud they were to represent the Stars and Stripes in this great country. 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, that was when the team consisted of college players, remember, before professionals could compete. And they defeated the Russians. Do you believe in miracles? The famous declaration by broadcaster Al Michaels. That may be one of the most memorable of all time statements made by during a sports broadcast. Really incredible. So about a half a century later, another generation. They have Americans. They have carved their place in history, winning the gold. And then the president recognized it. And it looks like he's invited them to attend the State of the Union address tomorrow. How cool would that be to have them in the House, in the chamber, while the president is speaking?
Take up a couple sections of the gallery.
That's right. And it was in overtime. Really cool. Man, a couple of great saves. Even the president noted the goaltender, Connor Hellebuck, that he saved a couple of goals. They really were phenomenal.
Well, he saved more than a couple.
Yeah, but there's a couple.
He kept them in it,
yeah, that's right. Man, what a game, though. Really, really exciting, no doubt about it. A nail-biter. Well, and I got to watch, I tuned in some more to the curling. That just fascinates me. And I got to tell you, I don't enjoy watching the guys do the curling as much as I do the women. I don't know why. Theirs just seems to be a little bit more strategic. They seem to think it through a little bit more. Maybe that's too.
So I take it you didn't see the 360 no-scope trick shot.
I did not. Tell me about that.
I don't know if it was like a legitimate toss or curl or whatever the name is for the individual stone going down the ice, but I didn't see it live. There was a video that was going viral of a dude. He starts and he spins 360 degrees around and then lets go of it and scored. There was some debate about whether or not it was legal because it looks like one of the brooms touches the stone. So it might have just been one of those, hey, we got to finish out the schedule here, but none of us really have a chance to go on. So here, we're just having fun. But yeah, that one went viral.
I'm still trying to learn it. I mean, I'm getting more familiar with it. I just like to watch it with a broom, and what's really kind of neat to watch is the camera's really good about focusing in on a close shot. What do you call the person who actually releases the rock there? The person that kneels down and is guiding it, and they're just trying to be so precise to get it going. A member of the team, right, when they're got a match going on. I don't know what that particular player is called.
Well, it depends on which rock it is, apparently.
Oh, okay.
The lead throws the first two rocks and sweeps for the rest.
Okay.
The second throws the third and fourth rock. The third, known as the vice skip, throws the fifth and sixth rock. And the skip, the team captain, who's directing strategy, throws the final two rocks.
Okay. Didn't know that. So they do refer to it as throwing it, right? Even though they're just kind of gently releasing it, sliding it. But when they focus on their face, the focus on from their eyes as they're looking down and they're guiding them. You've heard that before. And they're brooming it to try to get it on the right path. I just think it's kind of neat. And let's see, the girls did pretty good this weekend in that, didn't they? Who was it they defeated? Switzerland or something? It was a bit of a surprise. So, in the curling event. Anyhow, that's the Olympics.
They lost to Canada.
Yeah.
But I can't find the rest of the schedule.
I did an interview on Newsmax yesterday.
I told Switzerland.
That's who it was. It was Switzerland. And the subject was about a USA freestyle skier who actually skied for China. And this is an Olympic star, honestly, but she is American-born, Eileen Gu. And so it was a split-screen sort of debate with Ellis Hennigan. He from New Orleans. He was a prominent journalist. I think he was a New York Times bestseller. Leans more left, obviously. He was prominent during the Obama era as a journalist, as I recall. So the issue was, is she...
So he was basically a cheerleader.
Yeah. Somewhat.
There wasn't any journalism under Obama.
Eileen Gu is she somewhat of a traitor because she's American-born. Thus, she's a citizen. So her mother is Chinese, native Chinese. She sought and received her Chinese citizenship to compete for China. and did pretty well. She's a freestyle skier and grew up in the Bay Area, studied at Stanford. Here's the deal, though. She goes to China to ski, dissing her home country, her native country, because that's where she was born. She was born in this country as a citizen. She goes to China. So last year, she made a cool $23 million. $23 million, basically funded by the Chinese government. They don't have a problem with that, do they? If they think they could especially beat this country, and they've got to pay an athlete a huge sum of money to do so, and that comes from the government, they're perfectly fine with that. She made $23 million, but when she was asked, by the way, about, do you have any issue representing a country that is known for its inhumane treatment of Uyghurs and other sects, she said, well, I have to research that. I don't know much about it. Coming right back, Maya MacGuineas with the Committee for a Responsible Budget at 11:05.
We've sent that rib van.
This segment of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by Covington County Hospital in Collins, where your health matters.
Now back to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. So, just kind of wrapping up that little story about Gu, 22 years old, $23 million she made last year, courtesy of the Chinese government. She also said in 2020 about the specifics of her citizenship, which is still in question. That's one of the things I talked about yesterday, was it's still not quite clear if she handled all that correctly. China says you got to be a Chinese citizen to compete.
And China also does not offer dual national.
Correct. So that's the question. Did she denounce her or just forego her U.S. citizenship? It's not clear. But, right, China doesn't allow that, correct? She said...
China also claims her dad was a Harvard graduate, but they have no record of it.
That's weird. She said, regarding her citizenship, when I'm in the U.S., I'm American. When I'm in China, I'm Chinese. Oh, my gosh. Got it. Gee whiz. Honestly, a better story, and I was hoping we'd talk about this on my Newsmax interview yesterday. They said we might. You know how that goes. It just depends on the time. But the I think more heartwarming story, and one of even more critical human interest, is the skater, right, who skates for the United States, Liu. Some people pronounce it Liu. You've seen this, and then I've also seen it pronounced as Liu. But she is the daughter of a dissident, a Chinese dissident, who participated in the big Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. Came over to this country. She was born Alyssa Liu. I don't know if it's Liu or Liu. It's Liu. And I've seen it pronounced both ways.
I'd go with Liu.
Yeah, I think that's probably right, where the I is silent, right? So she comes
silent in our pronunciation.
Okay.
I'm sure if you were pronouncing it with a more Chinese accent, the I would be easier to say, but it's just, it doesn't come out real well from Southern mouths.
I agree with that. So She was born in this country. Her father, of course, as we said, he was able to escape China, moved into this country, and he and her used social media to protest human rights violations in China. He, a victim of some of that himself, Arthur Liu. And he has told the Associated Press that China spied on him and his daughter and said that there was a plot to intimidate them, not to go out and talk about the human rights violations that he personally witnessed and demonstrated against as part of the Tiananmen Square, the famous 1989 protest. And so, and they were using like undercover tactics to spy on her and her father. But it's kind of cool to watch her win the gold in women's singles figure skating. That was Thursday. And she got a lot of attention, Rado. You've seen this. She's got rather long, armpit length, blonde, sort of gold hair. And she had some sort of brunette stripes inserted in her hair, 3 of them. And actually 4, I believe. I couldn't find the 5th. I thought there might be 5. But it was basically her way of saying, I'm showing halos in my hair to correspond with the Olympic halos, the Olympic circles.
The rings.
The rings, yeah, thank you. And to kind of as a premonition of her intention and a statement of her intention to win. And she did. She won the gold. So she got a lot of attention for her coif. That's kind of cool. I'm looking at a photo of her right now. Delightful young lady, Alyssa Liu. But the Chinese wouldn't leave her alone because she learned from her father. And she and her father were open about the human rights violations. However, the skier we just talked about, she's not so sure. She said she'd have to do some research on that. Got to do some research on it. Yeah. You think that 23 million influenced that response to that issue?
In some part, yeah. Also, the safety of her family living over there.
Well, that's true. You're right. Because they will get mad at you you just disappear all of a sudden. That's the way. Wait, you're speaking out against the government? You can't do that. You're out of here.
They'll weld the metal door to your apartment to the metal frame of your apartment and say, good luck. They don't have to deal with you. They just make wherever you're living into a cell that you cannot get out of.
That's so true. Well, the Justice Department had actually charged 5 people for allegedly spying on behalf of the government on her and her father, going back to when she was 16, 5 or 6 years ago. This didn't just start happening. But that was a better feel-good story in my view because she was born to essentially a dissident, an immigrant from China. She, an American citizen. She skated for her country. She won the gold, and she speaks openly about her father's native country engaged in these human rights violations. And he being one of the protesters, calling attention to the world what the hell was going on in China. Who could forget those images of the tank out on the street there?
Apparently,
Tiananmen Square.
The vast majority of Chinese just can forget it every
right. Now. That's so totally right. Pretty cool, though.
And again, the vast majority of mainland Chinese don't even know it happened.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely true. On the C Spire text line, that's 601-879-4395. After reading over some of the Epstein files with all the redactions, I think, and hidden names, I decided to find a song and put music to it. Alice in Chains, Man in the Box on loop won the honor. Thank you for your attention and love the tie. I got a tie on today. I'm introducing a friend at my Rotary today after the show. That from Jerry in Waynesboro. Let's see. And the Lindsey Vonn story. What a show of grit. It teeters on the boundary of not smart and just being a true competitor who saw the end of a career They loved her sport. I hate she destroyed her knee. That, too, on the C Spire text line. Yeah, and that happened pretty rapidly once she got over there, right? And you knew it was a bad deal. But, yeah, I agree. A lot of persistence, determination, grit.
I'm still a bit half and half on that one. Like, yes, I can appreciate and respect the determination and grit it took to try to go down a mountain on skis without an ACL.
Yeah.
The more rational, less emotional part of my brain looks at it as, isn't there somebody who could have started their Olympic career an alternate that had an ACL that could have competed and not completely destroyed their leg?
Yep. Yeah, I agree.
If injuries happen in the Olympics and people have to pull out of the Olympics all the time against their own will.
Totally true.
The fact that whoever gave her the go-ahead medically to do that, that's a weight on them, and the decision to not allow an alternate to come in to live their Olympic dream feels like a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point that you make. She's, 40, 41? Yeah. So, still looks in great shape. Of course, there's no doubt about that. But not quite the same as a 22-year-old, 23-year-old. That's an incredibly, impeccably conditioned physical specimen 40-year-old.
And I'm not taking anything away from her qualifying and making it there. That is impressive at her age.
Agree.
But when you hurt yourself, and it's a danger to yourself to continue, why not let somebody else give it a shot?
I agree. Good point. Because those are few and far between. They are coveted.
And that's
slots.
why I'm leaning more towards why not give somebody else a shot, because you've had several now.
Yeah, that's true. So, we've talked some on the program about the SAVE Act, which passed the House. It's up there in the Senate. The Senate has their own version. And there's an aspect of it that would require folks to show a photo ID to vote, right, in federal elections in all 50 states. That means some states would have to change and adopt such policies. Well, the left, the Democrats in particular, our old buddy Liz Warren, they're speaking out against it. However, if you want to shovel snow in New York City, you got to have 2 small photos, 2 original forms of ID plus copies, and a Social Security card. Coming right back.
From the Seabrook.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert, here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth Studio. Once again, Maya MacGuineas, president of the Committee for a Responsible Budget, will join Middays at 11:05. We'll get an update from the committee's perspective on the nation's financial situation, get her thoughts on tariffs, and also Social Security solvency concerns as well. She did the committee release a statement concerning the tariffs over the weekend, figuring into the revenue picture of the country, estimating that over the next 10 years there would be a loss of a significant amount of revenue to the country from the tariffs. That, of course, is a concern, certainly a valid one, I would say. It's just the question is that the best way to raise revenue? So they're estimating that revenue lost amounts to about $1.9 trillion over the next 10 years. That's roughly $190 billion a year. And that's certainly a concern because the government's really not offering any alternative, although the Treasury Secretary says, hey, don't worry. we're going to use other statutory authority to impose tariffs, and thus we don't expect any material change in the revenue projected. He went to the business channels over this weekend, did Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent to deliver that message. The president wasted no time after the Supreme Court ruled that at least some of the tariffs, those that he imposed under the authority or on the basis that it was an emergency, is what they struck down, and he responded by just finding some other statutes. The administration obviously had that teed up, and Kavanaugh
put it in his dissent.
Yeah, and he sure did, and rather rapidly imposed 10% global tariffs, and then I guess they realized you actually can do 15% under our law for 150 days, by the way. So he did increase those tariffs to 15%. Signed the order to do so, but that's only good for 150 days. So here's the question. Might Congress act to make the Trump tariff policies permanent? Of course, unless they figure out a way to do that under the rules of reconciliation, you'd have to have some Democrats in the Senate to sign on to such policy. They don't seem inclined to do so. So I did catch this morning an interview with one of the members of the the House Appropriations Committee, who said, yeah, that option's on the table. We are working with the Senate and considering that avenue of essentially codifying the president's tariffs and running those through the bird bath over there in the Senate. That's where the old Senate parliamentarian has to bless it and sign off and say, yeah, this is good to go under the reconciliation rules of the Senate. Thus, it could pass with a simple majority. We'll see if that comes about. The downside of that to me, Rhino, is that there has been some talk of another reconciliation bill to reform taxes and actually possibly eliminating estate taxes and also indexing capital gains to inflation. So there's some other ideas in a reconciliation bill as well that have been floating around. I think if the Congress chooses to use the reconciliation process to enact the president's tariff agenda, that likely for this year would be off the table. You get into some complicated rules about how many of these you can do in a year and within a certain period of time, talking about reconciliation actions. So we will see where that lands. Certainly fascinating times indeed. Now, the president set to deliver his State of the Union address tomorrow, and you know that he'll spend a fair amount of time talking about this. It will be interesting, Rhino, in that members of the Supreme Court will be sitting just a few feet away from him there in the chamber. Now, usually they in their traditional black robes indicating that they are the members of the Supreme Court, and they sit up front. I wonder if that's always been the tradition in our State of the Union address. As long as I can remember, they get escorted into the room and announced, of course, and then they take their seat right there in front. Now, generally speaking, they have stone-faced, stoical expressions on their whole body. I mean, they just sit very still, really offer zero expressions, typically. There have been a couple of cases where they've kind of broke from that protocol, but in general, they're pretty stone-faced.
Well, the Constitution does not require their attendance. Their presence is seen as a gesture of respect among the branches that began during the Lyndon B. Johnson era.
Got it. Interesting. Well,
there were examples of individual Supreme Court justices showing up for the State of the Union before that, but that was the first time it became sort of a tradition for all of them to attend.
Okay. Well, you said back to the Lyndon B. Johnson era, which is about the time when I maybe had seen it just in passing when I was a kid. But I'm pretty certain that the president will have a thing or two to say directly to the Supreme Court justices. That would be consistent with his style, and it will be rather entertaining to see if the old stoical expression on their face changes a bit. I don't know.
And as a footnote, George Washington and John Adams both gave addresses to Congress in person, but Jefferson began a tradition, seeing that was too monarchical.
Oh, okay.
And sent written reports instead, which every president followed that tradition until Woodrow Wilson.
Interesting. Oh, good history there. Appreciate that. So the president's set to deliver that tomorrow night. I think some of the Democrats have already said, yeah, I ain't going, right? But I will tip my hat a bit to Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who made a statement to his members asking them to respect the process and comport themselves with decorum during the speech. We'll see if they do that. Let's be honest, both sides have been known to blurt out things while the president is delivering their speech. But we will certainly see. This should be quite interesting. The president, of course, is going to focus on, I believe he has been advised at least from his inner circle, to focus on affordability. Affordability. That's what Americans want to hear about, especially with the upcoming midterm elections. And the polls would indicate that voters at this point are skeptical. They're showing, virtually every poll that I've checked, that the president is underwater, less than 50%, on key issues. That top of the heap of those issues, of course, so-called affordability. So my recommendation to the president, not that I'm in a position to do so, and he certainly doesn't listen to me, would be to focus more on the future and what we can expect and relate how his economic policies and agenda will improve household finances. Focus less on blaming Biden. That would be my recommendation. I'm not saying Biden is not culpable here. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. The thing that set this whole inflation monster in motion was political in nature. It was the American Rescue Plan that Biden just had to put his mark on the economic recovery post-COVID, couldn't possibly let it just work itself out without any government action, because that's where we were headed. And no, he comes in with a $1.9 trillion measure that clearly was going to spark inflation. And it was all because he couldn't stand the fact that the economy is likely to recover without any action, in which case his perception was, misconception, well, the prior president, Donald Trump, in his term as the 45th commander-in-chief, would be attributed for that recovery. Okay, that's still in the best interest of the country, but in politics, often, as you know, attribution tends to trump what's in the best interest of our citizens. And that $1.9 trillion measure just put gasoline on what was a little smoldering, about to be put out fire, and he did it. Boom, there goes inflation, coming right back.
Just hearing the word.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all. And my lack of education hasn't hurt me none.
Welcome back, everyone. It's middays from the Element Wealth Studio. So, big-time market sell-off today. Don't check your accounts. You won't like it. That's because of the uncertainty surrounding the tariff situation. The NASDAQ is down 1.13%, 150, a couple hundred points. But the Dow, huge sell-off. Yeah, the NASDAQ now down 250. The Dow down over 717 points. That's 1.45%. So traders are just feeling queasy about this whole situation. They're looking for clarity regarding tariffs. The President, the Treasury Secretary, of course, they have suggested that our trading partners want to keep those agreements that were hammered out. And I think that that's the message to our trading partners, and so that's sort of separate from the tariffs. But these agreements are pretty extensive and include lots of details. So the President says, and the Treasury Secretary, we're going to keep these things in place. So they're looking for some clarity on it, too. They're not really sure what all this tariff stuff means when the Supreme Court strikes down what was in place. A lot of those agreements are external, however, to the tariffs that were struck down, the emergency tariffs. So we shall see where that goes. And then there's the question of, are they going to be refunds paid by the Treasury? And that's going to be sorted out in the court, because there are going to be some folks who will sue, already are. They're suing for refund of tariffs they paid. And then the question is, well, refund to who? Because it's really unclear as to, you do have a single party who did remit the tariffs in accordance with law, the importer, but did they pass those on at the retail level? Did they receive lower pricing from exporters to offset the tariff that they would pay to the Treasury? So you get really complicated. Then you got more involved in the supply chain as to where the tariffs, again, are levied throughout the supply chain and the distribution process all the way down to the consumer at the retail level. But it looks like we're going to see some lawsuits. But those are going to take a long time to sort out, I believe, and they will be extremely complicated. And so the court didn't provide any guidance. That's one of the things some of the folks are complaining about is, okay, well, you say that this may be an issue and you may be liable, but you didn't tell us.
They left it up to lower courts to decide.
Yeah. You didn't give us any guidance on that. That's right. And that, we're going to have a bunch of lawsuits clogging up those courts. Guess who will make money no matter what? The old lawyers. They'll get compensated pretty handsomely on both sides of that argument. So, man, we will see. Here at home, the K through 12 education funding bill passed the House. That would be HB 1935. And there's some rather significant increases in spending on public education in the state of Mississippi. About $43.5 million for general education funding and $192 million added to the Mississippi student funding formula. That, of course, replaced the old MAEP formula a couple of years ago. And so you're looking at $240 million or so of additional spending on education here in the state of Mississippi. That, of course, mainly consists of a $5,000 across-the-board teacher pay raise, $3,000 additionally for special education teachers. That in the House measure. The Senate has is it $2,000 or $3,000 teacher pay raise, Rhino? It's less than the House's $5,000. And that, of course,
sounds right.
Two sounds right to me, too. That has been transmitted down to the House. So the House, with a more generous raise, $5,000 for teachers. And so they'll get together, I'm sure, and sort this out. But the bottom line is, more money. Yeah, $2,000. Just found it. So in the last teacher pay raise went into effect, was passed in 2022. And that was $5,000. Remember, it started out at a lower amount until it finally was enacted at the $5,000 mark. So it's a question of those out there I know that believe that government should reduce its spending. This certainly doesn't do it. When you take this and add to it the amount of money we're sending to PERS and just organic increases in spending, Medicaid's asking for more money to match up with the federal government's part in that program, corrections, down the list. We're chewing up that surplus pretty quick here. Coming right back after Fox News and SuperTalk News with Maya MacGuineas for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
Your hour of Middays with Gerard Gibert is brought to you by the Mississippi Business Journal. Visit msbusinessjournal.com. Scott Coopwood, publisher and president.
Welcome to the show that challenges you to think deeply, and look beyond political posturing. You're listening to Middays with Gerard Gibert here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Welcome back, everyone. It's hour 2 of Middays. It's a Monday. That means Ricky Matthews, Super Talk Outdoors, will come your way at 12:05 today. Right now, it's Maya MacGuineas, the president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Hey, Maya, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so you guys have been pretty busy with all the stuff happening in Washington concerning our fiscal house and just our financial condition. You produced a very comprehensive report a couple of weeks ago, just really alerting Americans to this debt and deficit trajectory that we are on for the next several years, and in particular focused on how it looks like we're going to stay above that 100% of GDP range with respect to our federal debt. And then, of course, you folks have really sounded the alarm on the Social Security program, and it's pending insolvency without action.
Absolutely. So there's not a lot of good news when it comes to the fiscal numbers that are out there. And I think one of the things is that confusing is that a lot of people don't really see, like, well, how does this affect me and my household? Why should we care about the issue? But there are so many warning signals coming out of those who are scoring these things where we see our national deficit is going to be at record levels. It's the worst it's ever been when we weren't in an emergency. Interest payments on the national debt, single fastest growing thing in our budget. It's not healthcare. It's not defense. It's interest payments, many of which go outside of the country. But I think the thing that people can identify with the most is that those Social Security trust funds, the retirement program, is going to be insolvent in just a few years. In 6 years, really, less than 6 years. And when that happens, legally what happens is there are across-the-board benefit cuts for every single retiree, regardless of need. And so by the fact that our politicians are no longer governing with an eye towards fiscal responsibility, most of what they pass in Washington, D.C. these days isn't paid for. They borrow to do it. And they are ignoring the tremendous need to fix both Social Security and Medicare to avoid trust fund insolvency. We are on a dangerous path. Insolvent trust funds, unsustainable debt levels. We've got to bring attention to this issue, and we hope that people start to say to their lawmakers, we know these choices are hard, but we need you to make them so we can improve this fiscal situation.
So, as we have discussed on this program many times, just making sure the folks are aware, we've got the two broad categories of spending, the mandatory spending and discretionary spending, and of course, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, a number of other federal assistance programs fall into the mandatory category, which means Congress doesn't touch them on an annual basis, and then lap on the debt interest, you're up to 78% of total spending, and the Congress really doesn't even act for that to occur. It only focuses on the discretionary component, which is the remaining 24%. But the president is calling for an increase in defense spending, which represents about half of discretionary spending, of some 50%, $500 billion to $500 billion more of defense spending.
So your points are exactly right. First, in this country, we barely even pass budgets anymore. We're always talking about, are we going to have a government shutdown? Are we going to a default? And one thing people probably don't realize is most of the time, there's not an even actual budget in place. That is crazy. This is the largest economy in the world. My nonprofits, small companies, everybody needs to put a budget in place. Number two, when they do budget, they ignore, like you said, the vast majority of the budget, which doesn't even go through that process. They don't even look through these programs. What should we do? Are they accomplishing what they need? Are they paid for? That is all right there, just what makes no sense at all. But yes, so now we're in the situation where the president has asked for a 50% increase in defense. And one of the things as a politically independent group, we don't even say this is a good policy, this is a bad policy. People are going to have different beliefs. But what you need to understand that is if you want to increase defense by 50%, and that is going to cost trillions of dollars over the decade, how are you going to pay for it? You need to be able to cut other spending or raise taxes to pay for that. If there's a national security need, okay, we should do that, but you have to pay for it. We're not in a situation where we can borrow for all of these policies. Number two, we are hearing on this front that a lot of folks in the national security world are saying, we're not even sure how we would spend that much money because it's a tremendous increase. You'd want to make sure we understood the details and that it's all thought out and not just kind of top line talking point, but it comes from actual needs, actual budgeting priorities and figuring out, again, how it would be paid for, of which there has been no mention.
I've even seen reports, Maya, where some lawmakers on the Hill are saying, we're not sure what to spend $500 billion on. We can't find anything to spend it on.
This happens so often in national security where the experts will say, here's how much we need. And then Congress will say, well, we'd like a little more because there's jobs in our district. And the White House says, we'd like a lot more because we want to look tough on spending. But really, it needs to go first line. What are the risks? How are we going to protect against them? What are the programs to do so? If it's important, by all means, do it.
Sure.
But how are you going to pay for it? But this is a big increase. I don't think there's a lot of support for it out there so far from what I'm hearing.
You know, as a taxpayer, as an American citizen, I believe a core function of government is, in fact, to secure the nation and defend the nation. And so it's not that I object to spending money on defense. But if we're going to increase it, we got to find something else that perhaps does not fit into the realm of it's a core function of government. Let's reduce that.
That's exactly right. So it's as though once a spending program is put in place, it takes on a life of its own. And we never go and evaluate, is it still relevant? Is it doing what it's supposed to do? And is it doing it well and efficiently? And so we need to be willing to cut spending as much as we are increasing it in other areas. Right now, our spending levels are significantly higher than they have been historically. A lot of that has come out since COVID, where a lot of programs stayed in place, for instance. We need to go back and determine whether those programs still make sense. And similarly, we have about $1.5 trillion a year in targeted tax breaks, which are really just spending through the tax code. That's another place we could sort of quote unquote cut spending, but get rid of a lot of those tax breaks, which really are almost universally poor economic policies, poor ways to do what they're trying to do. So we need to be willing to spend as much time looking at what we'd get rid of in the budget as trying to layer on new unpaid for debt finance things.
Yeah, it's a good point that the series of credits that are available to many Americans that essentially take them off the tax liability rolls. We got 45, almost 50% of the households in the country pay no taxes. That's large income taxes. That's largely because they utilize these various credits, the child tax credit, the child dependent care credit, the EITC. You add all that up, and very few people actually end up paying income taxes. That's actually spending. You could see it as that.
Yes. It is. It's spending through the tax code. And another point I'd make about it is a lot of the money is most directed to the things where we see the most inflation. So affordability is a big discussion right now. Some of the most expensive and fastest growing industries are healthcare, higher education, and housing. So what happens is then politicians look at that and say, oh, let's give a tax break to somebody. Healthcare exclusion, home mortgage interest deduction. What that does is it actually pushes the prices up even more because you have more money in your pocket for those certain things, higher ed, college tuition, going up faster than the rest of the economy. And so we give more relief for student debt and other things, which pushes the costs up more. So the way that we do these things through the tax code is not only expensive and generally quite regressive, it doesn't do the job. It makes things more expensive, not less. So if we could just freeze new programs and spend a lot of time focusing on what to get rid of, something that DOGE talked about but ultimately wasn't effective in doing, for instance, but really look at where the biggest waste might be in the government or programs that are outdated or just not worth the huge costs of them, that would be an incredible step towards the fiscal changes we need to make.
Yeah. Totally. So we're up against a break in a minute. If you can hang around, we can keep talking in another segment if you're good to go with us.
Love to.
Okay.
I'd love to.
I'm going to make this statement before we go to break is you're well aware that most states, including our state of Mississippi here, by state statute, are required to balance their budgets. And I've often thought, well, if the federal government cuts spending sufficient to balance its budget, that would mean significant reductions of funds that are funneled to the states. Every state would be facing a budgetary crisis if the federal government balanced its budget.
Yeah, well, cut me off when we have to go to break.
We got to go.
You're absolutely right.
Think about it, and we'll come back and keep talking about it, Maya. Appreciate it. We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
Let's do this.
On SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Let's go.
We are back with you from the Element Wealth studio. We are visiting with Maya MacGuineas, president of the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So your thoughts about that assessment, Maya, that the states are essentially able to balance their budget because the federal government borrows money.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, right? So a big chunk of what the federal government does is return money to the states. That makes it easier that they have stricter requirements in terms of what they can or can't borrow. First off, trying to balance the federal budget at this point, it's a goal we used to talk about, and in fact we used to achieve. It is so far out of reach, it would require about $20 trillion in savings over a decade to get there. That doesn't even mean anything to anybody, but to put it in perspective, the largest savings vehicle we've had in over a decade was only $1.5 trillion in savings. So there's no way we're going to find $20 trillion in savings and balance the budget. We think actually the right goal to think about is something the Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary Bessent, has talked about, which is bringing deficits from where they are at 6% down to about 3%. That would be reassuring to markets. So it's aggressive enough to reassure markets, but I think it's reasonable enough that it would be doable. You don't want to set out a fiscal goal that would fail. But it's correct that some of this is going to have a big effect on states. And so, one, you have governors and state legislatures that we're hoping will get more involved and say, hey, you need to do things like fix Social Security, and you need to think about how you would make these fiscal changes. But two, we can't pretend it's not going to put pressure on every part of the federal budget. Problem is we got here because our leaders have been pandering for so long. You almost have this ongoing war between Republicans and Democrats saying, let me outbuy you. Let me give you big tax cuts. Let me give you new spending. Won't pay for any of them. Vote for us. And we're out of practice of anybody saying, if something's worth doing, here's how we're going to pay for it. We're going to need to get back to that culture or that norm of actually not depending on national debt in order to strengthen our economy, strengthen our ability to be prepared for future emergencies, strengthen our national security, and create an environment where we're not leaving an economy that's completely a wreck for the next generation, which is what we're on track to do now.
And it's a great point. I've heard the Treasury Secretary make that same statement that he'd like to get, and just for the benefit of our audience, he'd like to get our deficit down from its present level of roughly 6% of GDP. You can do the math there. Our GDP is $31 trillion. Our deficit, 18, somewhere in there. He'd like to half that, get it down to 3%, which would mean that our deficit would be $1 trillion or below, which would be fantastic relative to $1.8 trillion. And that, of course, his theory is we can do that by scaling our GDP and economy. So without necessarily spending more on a commensurate basis. Revenues are up, even with the Trump tax cuts. We are enjoying some increase in revenue. I think that was to be expected. And that's something that the folks on the left side of the aisle don't tend to understand, is that just because you increase rates, it doesn't necessarily translate to increased revenues. In fact, most of the time it doesn't necessarily. But, Maya, there's just not an appetite on the Hill to start really taking a serious look at this spending. How do we address this? And when we get to the point where it really starts causing pain for Americans, do you think we'll make some political adjustments at that point?
So, again, you hit on two really important points. Plus, you know all the numbers. It's good to talk to somebody who knows these numbers inside and out. But one is economic growth, right? It really is important that when we do these policies, we think about how will they affect the economy. And the thing is, right now, growth is strong, but some of that comes from a fiscal sugar high. When you borrow a lot of money, which we do with big deficits right now, that will juice your economy in the short term, but not in the long term. And so what we really need is a debt deal, which will actually focus more on productive investment, generating increases in the economy that are sustainable. They're not easy to do, but they're better in the long term. The other point is there is no political appetite to do this. There's some efforts. We have a group called the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum that brings in speakers and works on pointing out that there needs to be cooperation and political cover. But nobody's really out there saying, let's fix Social Security today. Let's talk about where we need new revenues. No, we can't do all that in national security. All those things that is the serious conversation we should have. And the reason is, we are so deeply polarized. Our parties are so committed to winning each election, which they refer to as existential each and every time, that they will tell you what they think as a voter you want to hear, not what as a country we need to hear.
That's 100%
and how do we
right.
go back to an era where, I'm like, and they're not wrong, because right now, if a lot of people followed the advice I would give them privately, they'd probably lose.
Yeah.
And that's not what you want. You want the people who understand and care about this issue to be able to give each other political cover. So one idea I've thought about is, how about just say on Social Security, let's have a ceasefire. Let's have both sides say, I promise not to attack your ideas for doing something. Now, if you're doing nothing, I'm going to criticize it. But if you have an idea to fix Social Security, I'm not going to say why that's wrong. You're pushing grandma off the cliff and you hate young people, like whatever. I'm going to, if I don't like it, I'll come up with an alternative. But if we could focus on solutions rather than political cheap shots, it would create a better environment to do what every serious politician knows we need to do. And what we're risking is the role of this country on the global stage if we're not able to rebuild the fiscal foundation of this country. It's very dangerous at this time of global tension, the risks we're taking with our budget and our borrowing.
So, Maya, are you worried that we get to a point where buyers of our Treasury securities just demand higher yields, and that causes problems, of course, in the economy, and that translates all the way down to the kitchen table, honestly, that we get to that point here because we're not looking so good from a debt to GDP perspective, which is probably considered more than anything, just the total amount of debt secondary to that.
Yeah, debt to GDP right now, 100% of GDP is projected to go up to 120% more if we add more. I do worry about that. I worry we could have some kind of a fear in the treasury markets, even one bad auction, even other countries, which we're starting to see this, talking about, here's a foreign policy tool for us. Let's sell U.S. Treasuries because we don't like what the U.S. is doing on other fronts. It's an incredible vulnerability that we're left with, which could hurt markets. And you look at the 10-year, if that goes up more, that affects, or any of the rates, of course, affect your ability to borrow on your credit card, the affordability of mortgages. But it also means that the debt that we're incurring for interest, again, the fastest growing part of the federal budget, will start to go more quickly. And if we reach a point, it's called R versus G, but where if interest rates are higher than our growth rate, and we're projected to hit that in just a few years, then you can get in a debt spiral. 1/3 of our debt market is short-term treasuries, which turn over in less than a year. If your rates are going up, when you have to turn that over and borrow again, rates go higher and higher. And we're not just spending $1 trillion in interest payments a year, we're spending more. And I worry about that incredibly. And I worry even if we don't get to that moment, it's already slowing our economic growth right now.
Agree. A couple of minutes left, Maya. What are you expecting from the president tomorrow night? Of course, this issue of affordability seems to have everybody all worked up as we approach the midterms.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've heard a little bit of this so far where the White House has taken credit for some fiscal improvements, which are true, but cherry-picked, right? So if you're looking at a certain amount of time, there's been fiscal improvements. But if you look at the trajectory, it's clear that our debt is growing faster than our economy.
Yeah.
And this is a president, we've seen this before. He loves tax cuts. He loves spending increases. He doesn't love fiscal hard choices. In his defense, not many politicians do. But I imagine he'll emphasize some of the short-term improvements, but not talk about this unsustainable trajectory that we are on.
You know, Maya, the natural inclination, of course, of an elected official is to tell the people what they want to hear. And the last time I can remember, and nobody wants to impose the pain, and the last time I guess I can remember that was Ronald Reagan, who took over for Jimmy Carter. And he brings in someone to run the Fed, and boy, did he ever impose pain. But it did rid us of that inflation monster.
Well, if you get hit with inflation, which is something that is the result of excessive borrowing, you have to have a strong Fed that's willing to do that. Another story was Ronald Reagan, who cut taxes, obviously, also raised taxes when he realized he'd gone too far. And so what you need is the politicians who are willing to look through the whole budget and say, where are they willing to pull things back if our budget's out of whack? And anyone who looks at it right now, read a CBO report, read an OMB report. There's no denying that we're on a path we don't want to be on. Anyone who reads something will come away very concerned.
Yeah. And so we should also point out, I know you guys discuss and write quite a bit about the pending problem with Social Security. It's a current problem, but it becomes a real problem for beneficiaries in a short 6 years. Those who are running for the U.S. Senate in this cycle are going to be in office when this happens.
Thank you. I think that is like the most important point for these upcoming elections, which is if you are running for Senate, you will be you'll be there when this program becomes insolvent. How do you want to fix it? We could look at a payroll tax cap. We could raise the retirement age because we're living longer. We could put in place a fiscal commission, ask people who don't need their benefits to have slower increases and protect people who do need them. There's so many options. The fact that we have waited not years but decades to fix this critically important program that many people depend on really is, unfortunately, a testament to how our political system is failing. Anybody who's running for office should have a solution to Social Security, and anybody in the media who's interviewing them should ask, what's your plan? And anyone who says, I promise to protect the program and do nothing, that's as good as saying you will have a 24% benefit cut. We will cut your by $18,000, and that is not someone who should be voted into a role.
Keep up the great work, Maya. Look forward to talking to you again. Maya MacGuineas, the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget.
From the Seabrook.com.
Middays with Gerard Gibert.
It is
on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
Morgan, Rhino, they got some splaining to do. They have admitted that they closed Trump-affiliated accounts after the January 6th incursion. And so Jamie Dimon there, the CEO of the company, who I do think is one of the best CEOs in America and certainly top-notch banking CEO. Yeah, that's uncalled for. That was the wrong move there. And I support free markets, of course, and if they want to close somebody's account, just don't want to do business with them, I respect the right to do that. I think a business should be able to do business and trade with whom they want under whatever terms and conditions the parties can agree to, period, without government intervention, unless you're somehow violating law. Now, in this particular case, was there some sort of discrimination statutes that were violated? Possibly. And we've got a bill here in our state, right, Rhino, that would sort of cleans that up and does not allow financial institutions in our state to discriminate in its banking practices because of one's political viewpoints. I have mixed feelings about that. I certainly don't want banks to do that. I think it's stupid if they do that, honestly. If you're not willing to do business with a party because of their political viewpoints, if you want to be stupid, I think the government ought to let you. And I don't know that that's happening. I've not heard any reports about it, but at least in our state, our legislature saw fit to put a measure out there. I don't think it's passed yet that would prohibit such discrimination. What's crazy to me, Rhino, is we can do that, but, I got off on a rant last week, but we can't pass a bill that would prohibit discrimination in public sector procurement. That just is mind-boggling to me. I'm still, as you could tell, not happy about that and think that is a mistake on the part of our legislature. Justice Neil Gorsuch, he is one of those who voted to overturn in the Trump tariffs. He's one of those that voted in favor of the idea that the president overstepped his boundaries. And I will give him credit, regardless of how you feel about this issue and where you land on this policy and the Supreme Court's decision. I will say that his brief, at least this one paragraph, I thought was very well written. It made a lot of sense. He says, for those who think it is important for the nation to impose more tariffs, I understand that today's decision will be disappointing. All I can offer them is that most major decisions affecting the rights and responsibilities of the American people, including the duty to pay taxes and tariffs, are funneled through the legislative process for a reason. Yes, it can be tempting to bypass Congress when some pressing problem arises, but the deliberative nature of the legislative process was the whole point of its design. If history is any guide, the tables will turn, and the day will come when those disappointed by today's result will appreciate the legislative process for the bulwark of liberty it is. So, at least he didn't seem to ground his opinion in politics. Because you got some others who did. It just doesn't matter. We can't let Trump win, right? That's not the way it's supposed to work. So, regardless of how you feel about the decision, I'll give Gorsuch credit for at least providing some rational explanation for how he reached his decision. Now, the three who dissented, they disagree with the justice, but that's what the Supreme Court's all about. And they provided their rationale. I do agree that, you can on the one hand say that the president can embargo and regulate trade, but on the other hand, they can't impose tariffs. It just seems to me like we talked about it earlier this morning that we have some problems in laws that were written a way long time ago that even gave rise to this case, if you think about it. I think most people would say, yeah, stuff like that ought to happen through the legislative process. But on the other hand, we do have exceptions in certain situations where we can't wait, and the commander-in-chief needs to be able to act. And that's exactly what the president said. He stated that he thought the trade imbalance and certainly what we know to be massive, flagrant manipulation of currency and subsidization of business and industry in China and some of our adversaries, which does make the trade field unlevel. No doubt about it. The president reacted by imposing tariffs to try to square that up. But it seems like it's crazy to say, no, you can't do that, but you could issue an embargo, which seems to me is even more powerful. And if that is a power that the court says, yeah, that rests with the executive branch, but the power to tax, to tariff, essentially does not, that seems contradictory in my view. So it's kind of hard to hang your hat on the opinion reached by the majority of the justices on that basis. And so the president and his inner circle say, okay, well, we're going to use these other statutes. And like you said, Gorsuch even said that. You have Kavanaugh, pardon me. In his vote, he even said,
and Kavanaugh has a history of that. If the decision is going against Trump, he usually puts language in his opinion that Trump could literally just go, yep, taking that and putting it into effect.
And so, and that's why he decided as he did, essentially. So, okay, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it over here. And the Treasury Secretary came out and said it's not going to have any impact on the revenue that comes to the Treasury because we're going to impose these global reciprocal tariffs rather than the emergency tariffs. That's essentially what we did, right? We traded the emergency tariffs for these reciprocal tariffs, which are not subject to the interpretation of the Emergency Powers Act and all that sort of stuff. So that's where we are. But the markets are saying, man, we just don't know, guys. You got to get your act together. We got a White House, a Congress, and a Supreme Court that all seem to be on different pages on so many matters, and we need clarity. We need certainty. Just tell us what the rules are so we can carry on with business accordingly. But today they're saying, we just don't know where all this is going, and they're selling off. And kind of sorry to see that because we have experienced significant gains. But all the gains we got in February right now are wiped out in the first half of the month. They're wiped out through the losses that we are incurring at this moment in time. So we'll see where all that goes. On the C Spire text line, on the 769, Maya is good. There's no doubt she is. I read her stuff all the time and her team, and we have had members of her team as well that focus on certain areas, that relate to our fiscal affairs. They're excellent, and I subscribe to their newsletter. If you're interested in that sort of wonky stuff, I recommend it. It's just the best analysis and summary that I've seen on the nation's fiscal activity and just the status of our budget, our debt, our deficit, all of our fiscal affairs. Yeah, she's excellent, no doubt. They better get it figured out. Otherwise, there's going to be a lot of people headed to Washington. I agree. And not for 1 minute, Rhino, do I think that the Congress will allow a 24% cut to Social Security benefits come about. That is what's going to happen, as you heard Maya say, and something we've said many times and with respect to the public employees retirement system in Mississippi. Doing nothing means we're going to have a problem. You can't just keep kicking the old can down the road, and that's the message coming from Maya and her team at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. You must act. Inaction means we are going to have a 24% cut in benefits. And I agree with this person on the 601 on the C Spire text line that, yeah, there would be a lot of people headed to Washington should that be the case. Some tariffs would not be affected by the ruling. That's correct. That's Paul and Meridian. That's right. And that's what we're talking about, Paul. Those that were imposed using the emergency powers of that statute, those were nullified. And the others that are just reciprocal tariffs, they were allowed to stand. So it wasn't all of them. That's absolutely correct. And that's why of the $300 billion of estimated revenue from tariffs, it is also forecast that this ruling would cut about $170 billion of that. However, the president responded, as we said, by imposing this 15% global tariff across the board, so that pretty much is a wash with respect to the revenue picture, and that's what the Secretary of the Treasury said. He's going to talk about it tomorrow night. I can't wait. It's going to be fascinating. Okay, coming up next is going to be a best of. I'm out of here today, getting ready to go introduce a friend of mine in my Rotary. But back in the Element Wealth studio again tomorrow. Hope you tune in. Stay safe, and God bless.
Take a little trip, take a little trip, take a little trip with me.
Polyup of Mississippi.
You're listening to Middays with Gerard here on SuperTalk, Mississippi.
When I think back on all the crap I learned in high school, it's a wonder I can think at all. And my lack of education hasn't hurt me none.
Welcome back, everyone. It's Middays from the Element Wealth studio. So, big-time market sell-off today. Don't check your accounts. You won't like it. That's because of the uncertainty surrounding the tariff situation. The NASDAQ is down 1.13%, 150, a couple hundred points, but the Dow, huge sell-off. Yeah, the NASDAQ now down 250. The Dow down over 700, 717 points. That's 1.45%. So traders are just feeling queasy about this whole situation. They're looking for clarity regarding tariffs. The President, the Treasury Secretary, of course, they have suggested that our trading partners want to keep those agreements that were hammered out. And I think that that's the message to our trading partners, and so that's sort of separate from the tariffs. But these agreements are pretty extensive and include lots of details. So the President says, and the Treasury Secretary, we're going to keep these things in place. So they're looking for some clarity on it, too. They're not really sure what all this tariff stuff means when the Supreme Court strikes down what was in place. A lot of those agreements are external, however, to the tariffs that were struck down, the emergency tariffs. So we shall see where that goes. And then there's the question of, are there going to be refunds paid by the Treasury? That's going to be sorted out in the court, because there are going to be some folks who will sue, already are. They're suing for refund of tariffs they paid. And then the question is, well, refund to who? Because it's really unclear as to, you do have a single party who did remit the tariffs in accordance with law, the importer, but did they pass those on at the retail level? Did they receive lower pricing from exporters to offset the tariff that they would pay to the Treasury? So you get really complicated. And you got more involved in the supply chain as to where the tariffs, again, are levied throughout the supply chain and the distribution process all the way down to the consumer at the retail level. But it looks like we're going to see some lawsuits. But those are going to take a long time to sort out, I believe, and they will be extremely complicated. And so the court didn't provide any guidance. That's one of the things some of the folks are complaining about is, okay, well, you say that this may be an issue and you may be liable, but you didn't tell us.
They left it up to lower courts to decide.
Yeah. You didn't give us any guidance on that. That's right. And that, we're going to have a bunch of lawsuits clogging up those courts. Guess who will make money no matter what? The old lawyers. They'll get compensated pretty handsomely on both sides of that argument. So, man, we will see. Here at home, the K-12 education funding bill passed the House. That would be HB 1935. And there's some rather significant increases in spending on public education in the state of Mississippi. About $43.5 million for general education funding and $192 million added to the Mississippi student funding formula. That, of course, replaced the old MAEP formula a couple of years ago. And so you're looking at $240 million or so of additional spending on education here in the state of Mississippi. That, of course, mainly consists of a $5,000 across-the-board teacher pay raise, $3,000 additionally for special education teachers. That in the House measure. The Senate has is it $2,000 or $3,000 teacher pay raise, Rhino? It's less than the House's $5,000. And that, of course,
two sounds right.
Two sounds right to me, too. That has been transmitted down to the House. So the House, with a more generous raise, $5,000 for teachers. And so they'll get together, I'm sure, and sort this out. But the bottom line is more money. Yeah, $2,000, just found it. So in the last teacher pay raise went into effect, was passed in 2022. And that was $5,000. Remember, it started out at a lower amount until it finally was enacted at the $5,000 mark. So it's a question of those out there, I know, that believe that government should reduce its spending. This certainly doesn't do it. When you take this and add to it the amount of money we're sending to PERS and just organic increases in spending, Medicaid's asking for more money to match up with the federal government's part in that program, corrections, down the list. We're chewing up that surplus pretty quick here. Coming right back after Fox News and SuperTalk News.
A SuperTalk Mississippi media production.